In order of the Wilmington City Council, I'd like to welcome all those who are watching us on TV and all those who are here. Thank you for taking an interest in your government. At this time, I'd like to recognize Councilmember Clifford Barnett to do the invocation. If everyone will stand. And
God, we thank you for another opportunity to serve you by serving your people. Now we ask you, would you be so kind to open our ears so that we can hear you, open our hearts so we can feel you, and then even open our hands so we can work for you even more. We pray that you'll bless every citizen in our great city, from, let's say, the guy who's standing on the street corner who I passed by just a few moments ago, to the person who's living in the biggest house in the city. I pray, God, that the work that we do will make each of their lives better. For we ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get started this evening, I need to do a roll call, but I will also recognize that Councilmember Neil Anderson is out of town and will be back at our next scheduled meeting. So at this time, I will take the roll call. Mayor Pro Tem, are you here? Yes, present. Okay, Councilmember Ibenbarg? Present. Councilmember O'Grady?
Here.
Councilmember Barnett?
Present.
Present.
And the chair is here. Everybody's here and accounted for. At this time, before we get started, I do want to make an announcement here. There's a great fellow here in this community named Major Mark Craddock, who is with the Salvation Army. He's been running the Salvation Army for quite some time and has done a tremendous job. I know he was here during the hurricane, and he was helping us during COVID, and he's done a lot of things for this community and for the residents of this community. And I just want to read on behalf of the city, for the residents of the city of Wilmington, we would like to take this opportunity to congratulate you on your retirement for many years of service with the Salvation Army, culminating your career here in the Cape Fear since 2018. Under your leadership, area residents have benefited from many services, including shelter, the Red Shelter Diner, which provides countless meals, the food pantry, as well as successful life skills programs. Your vision to expand and offer a greater presence in our community is commendable and something we are grateful for. May you and Leanne enjoy retirement to the fullest and continue to serve your community through the many avenues of volunteering. Once again, Major Craddock, congratulations, job well done, and thank you for your public service to this great community, but not only to this community, but to all the communities you serve through the Salvation Army. I just want to say thank you. So at this time, we have several presentations. Our first presentation is a rail realignment environmental review update. And this time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Aubrey Parsley, who is the rail realignment manager. Aubrey?
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, members of council. The purpose of tonight's presentation, which will be up shortly. Go back to the first slide. Thank you. Is to update you all on some upcoming milestones that we have for the rail realignment project, specifically related to the environmental review process. Because we have upcoming milestones, the city will be reaching out to the public again for feedback and comments. That comment period will be open from June 28th through July 26th, so 30 days, which makes tonight a good time for an update on the project's overall progress, as well as to highlight this public outreach effort and make folks aware of it. So zooming out on our schedule, this slide shows the activities we currently have funded. We've been working on environmental review now for about a year, and we're a little over halfway through that process. We're also working on conceptual engineering. When you hear conceptual engineering, think getting to 15% engineering design. We're very near that benchmark as well for this project, but most of our effort is presently focused on our federal environmental review. So just want to do a very quick refresher on the environmental review process. I think this funnel diagram simplifies it is better than anything else that I've seen so far. Please don't get caught up in the wording, the vocabulary, the semantics. This is really just a process which looks at first all the feasible options for a project. And then after doing a bunch of research, those options, design alternatives are compared against one another and then systematically eliminated, narrowed down until a preferred alternative is reached. And that preferred alternative is one that will be determined to be the least environmentally damaging, but still practical, still accomplishes the project's purpose and need. And of course, we do that process in collaboration with many regulators, regulatory agencies, as well as with full transparency to the public. We've done a bunch of work on this step 2 that you see here highlighted in blue on the slide, and we're ready to share that work with the public and with regulators to get feedback. So just a quick review by the numbers. The feasibility study that we did back in 2017 yielded 3 feasible route corridors for the project. Then those 3 broad corridors went through the first of the 3 steps of our environmental review process, and we came out of that with 6 route alternatives, which fit within roughly those 3 broader corridors. And then this work that we've done for step 2 of our environmental review process, we have now shortlisted that 6 down to 2. So what we're going to do in this public outreach is show everyone the work that we did to get those 2 alternatives on the short list. First, we show the agencies. Then with some agency input, we'll show the public. And then we'll go back to the regulators, the regulatory agencies, this time with the benefit of public input and feedback, and then arrive at our destination of having one preferred route alternative, which will refine the project to within a 200-foot corridor. So it's an important milestone in the overall process. An additional important milestone that we're working toward is getting what's called preliminary navigational clearances for the 2 bridges that are required for this project over the Cape Fear River. The United States Coast Guard has jurisdiction over navigation on the Cape Fear River. There's an entirely separate process that the Coast Guard requires to give folks or projects preliminary navigational clearances. It obviously involves a lot of due diligence, as it should, with the maritime community, users of the waterway, and other agencies and regulators like the Army Corps of Engineers. Public feedback is also a very important component of this process as well. So we're incorporating navigation as part of this big public outreach effort that we have coming up here. I want to make sure that we have as full an understanding as possible for how the Cape Fear River is being used so we can design accordingly. This is the last slide I have for tonight. Again, this public outreach effort will take place over a 30-day period, June 28th through July 26th. This first series of bullets up here on the left spells out all the different ways that we'll go about spreading the word for this comment and feedback opportunity. We'll also be showcasing this work in a number of different ways. First, in a virtual room. We did that for our first round of public outreach and got a lot of positive feedback for that. It's on demand, it's very accessible, so we'll be doing that again. We'll also be hosting 2 live Zoom calls where anyone can call in, ask any team member a question, provide us with your comments. I'm willing to do presentation to any individual or any group out there. All my contact information is on the title slide. Call, email, text me your questions, request a presentation, be happy to accommodate that. And then, of course, for those unable to access content online, we'll be leaving hard copies of all this material in public places throughout the city, libraries, and so forth. So with that, I'll conclude tonight's presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Arbor? Arbor, keep up the good work. I know there's a lot of details to go into this project, but it's a very important project for this community, and having 38 rail crossings in the middle of this city, it's important that we stay focused on the future, and where the future is for this community is that we need to move that rail on the other side.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next presentation is Eastern North Carolina Recovery and Resilience Alliance update, and this time I'd like to recognize Mr. Tony McEwen, our Special Assistant to the City Manager for Legislative and Community Affairs. Tony, welcome. Thank you.
Hey, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I appreciate you all allowing me the opportunity to come before you and share with you an issue I know Mayor Saffo is very familiar with, but I'd like to make sure that the rest of Council and the community are aware of this as well. And this is something I think that is obviously very relevant as we approach hurricane season, which will very much be a mild hurricane season, as we all know. But so here's something, again, that we should be proud of, is the Eastern North Carolina Recovery and Resiliency Alliance. Next slide, please. I'll give you a little background on it here. So this was an organization that we started loosely after Hurricane Florence. Originally, it was an effort started by Mayor Sappho to bring some county commission chairs from throughout the region together in Wilmington to be able to talk with leaders such as DOT secretary, members of Congress, that type of thing, provide an opportunity, a forum for leaders, especially in the rural communities, to come into Wilmington and have the opportunity to get in front of leaders that they maybe are not able to get in front of on behalf of their community. And so we've tried to be a bridge builder through this organization. And so again, originally it was an effort to bring resources and attention to recovery. There was value as this dialogue continued and the effort grew, value seen in amplifying our collective voices to advocate for both immediate as well as long-term recovery and resilience needs throughout Eastern North Carolina. Next slide, thank you. There we go. So after our first few meetings and after obviously Hurricane Florence, we wanted to, it was a tough thing for our community and for our regions, but we wanted to see it as an opportunity to take advantage of the spotlight that unfortunately we had on us through Hurricane Florence to advocate better for our communities, to get in front of leaders. And as you see here, this is two examples. Very quickly after Hurricane Florence, we organized a small group of elected officials throughout Eastern North Carolina to join Mayor Sappho and myself going up to Washington. We got in front of multiple cabinet secretaries. There you see at the time, Secretary Ben Carson. HUD obviously has a lot of influence over recovery issues and on the federal level. And then Secretary DeVos was generous enough with her time. And one of the unique things about that particular picture and that opportunity, I think kind of captures what this alliance is about in a nutshell. We had 13 different school superintendents from throughout Eastern North Carolina, counties as big as New Hanover County, but also as small as Whiteville City Schools, got to join in on that meeting with the U.S. Secretary of Education. And over the course of 30 minutes to an hour, got to voice the concerns and what impacts are being felt during the recovery and during the disaster time within their school districts and what they needed from the federal government. So that was a perfect opportunity that the city of Wilmington led the way on and provided that as a forum for those superintendents. Next slide, please. As well, on that very first trip, we got to get in front of notable folks like former Governor of Florida, Charlie Crist, now Congressman, who's a big leader on resilience and recovery issues in Congress. And then on the right, you see the mayor of Surf City, our own Mayor Sappho, and the mayor of New Bern. And not pictured is the county manager from Pender County. That's in a meeting in the White House where we got to be in front of their top disaster recovery officials within the administration at the time. Next slide, please. So through that effort and the immediate attention that we garnered through this nonpartisan group that was starting to kind of bubble up from here in Wilmington and Eastern North Carolina, we started to attract the attention of some national organizations that had been working in this field for some time and saw what we were leading the way on is an opportunity to work with local officials and advance their policy goals as well, where they had previously fallen short. So American Flood Coalition, Environmental Defense Fund, and especially the Pew Charitable Trust have been supportive of our efforts, both financially as well as making connections for us, getting us in the right rooms, including rooms like the White House, like we discussed. And so they continue to be involved, and I'll touch on that again in a moment, but they continue to be involved up until this day. Next slide, please. So once we had this kind of initial positive advocacy visit to Washington and our work with our state legislators, we started to expand the group. So it wasn't just a handful of folks. So as you see on the left, that's our very first meeting actually, where we brought together a number of state legislators and mayors and county commission chairs and members of council and other commissions in Burgall for our very first meeting. I think we had 20-some communities represented. Our next meeting was in Duplin County, where we had over 50 communities represented. And the beauty of this is the first meeting, as an example, in Burgall, we brought together state legislators. And I remember specifically Senator Harper Peterson and one of the most conservative members of the State House, Jimmy Dixon, who represents Duplin County, sitting beside of each other, learning from each other about what each of their communities faced. And so it was a beautiful thing, an opportunity for us to build relationships with folks that we may not have previously had relationships with. And so coming out of that, what we started to do is develop in these meetings a set of priorities. And we were pretty informal at first with how we approached this. Next slide, please. But once we got those priorities, we unveiled them at the General Assembly in a pretty widely covered press conference. There you see Chairman George Brown from Pender County and our Mayor Sappho, who those two have basically served as unofficial co-chairs of this alliance. And then you see a number of legislators flanked also by the Mayor of Whiteville, Mayor Wallace, who are both leaders in this effort as well. And so we had pretty positive feedback from that press conference. Next slide, please. And from there, we started working more directly with the state and national media. Here is our chamber CEO, Natalie English, and again, Chairman Brown and Mayor Sappho, doing a 30-minute segment that aired on statewide television with Capital Tonight. We also did, again, a significant amount of national media as well. And so, again, I'm going to keep returning to this theme of kind of this rural-urban divide. And there you see we have a chairman of a rural county, and then probably the most urban community in eastern North Carolina, Wilmington, working together on this issue and being seen working together on a statewide level. Next slide, please. So where we're at now, current advocacy efforts and opportunities. So recently, I worked at the staff level on behalf of the elected officials to basically convene a virtual listening tour to where we incorporated the Pew Charitable Trust Environmental Defense Fund as well as American Flood Coalition. And we had multiple virtual meetings that included staff and elected officials from throughout eastern North Carolina. And we facilitated that, but the experts in those three organizations took copious notes throughout the entire process. And from that, we developed a list of 6 priorities around recovery and resilience, flood resilience in particular. And we had a media rollout of that. We had a significant amount of media was around that. News Observer, Charlotte Observer, all did very lengthy pieces around it. TV media picked it up. And so from that, we have a tremendous amount of opportunities both at the state and federal level. The folks with the Pew Charitable Trust, as an example, who are working with us are involved with the current administration on the inside, developing the infrastructure plan that likely will be considered going forward by Congress. The intel that they give us and others give us, as well as we've had great partnerships with Congressman Rausser's office, Senator Tillis's office. Those two offices in particular have been very helpful to this effort and very active in it. Our sense is that there's going to be very significant resources that come from the federal level that will make a major difference around disaster recovery, but in particular flood resilience. And that's, again, kind of our main focus at this point. And so how do we turn those opportunities at the federal level into opportunities at the state level? A lot of the issues is that these smaller communities, the Fair Bluffs as an example, they were almost wiped off the map from Hurricane Florence and Hurricane Matthew. They're not necessarily prepared to receive those funds, is most of what we heard through our listening tour. And so what can we do at the state level and the local level to make sure not only Wilmington, but the other communities in eastern North Carolina are prepared for those opportunities? There are 2 major pieces of legislation that have been introduced that we've influenced. One at the Senate level, which that in and of itself at the state Senate level would be more than we've ever done here at the North Carolina General Assembly as it relates to recovery and resilience. However, there's a much bigger bill, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Next slide, please. And that is House Bill 500. And I know you can't read that graphic. I'm going to explain it real quick. So that's the House Majority Leader, who's a UNCW graduate, John Bell. He represents Goldsboro. He introduced House Bill 500 with a number of bipartisan co-sponsors. Within that very lengthy bill that appropriates nearly $200 million, they took 5 of our 6 priorities that our alliance developed and directly put them into that comprehensive bill. Each of those 5 priorities has a minimum of $20 million attached to it. And so what we did the other day actually is on 48 hours notice, when we saw that this was coming up for a vote in committee. On 48 hours notice, we put out the call for communities throughout Eastern North Carolina that had been involved in this alliance to come together and participate in a webinar to where we can break this down, what it means to them and how they can advocate to get this across the finish line. We had 78 different communities within a 48-hour notice to participate in this webinar. A number, like Lumberton as an example, immediately passed a resolution the very next day supporting it. Jacksonville wrote letters of support. All these different communities wrote letters of support to the legislators. So we are doing everything we can to make sure. And so this graphic that I mentioned, which again, I apologize, you can't see, is what we provided those participating communities to show that of our 6 priorities, 5 of them are included, where they're included in the bill and how much dollars are appropriated to each one of these. Next slide, please. So that's basically it. I'll just say real quickly, what is the value to Wilmington for this? We all have heard in the last few years there's a major divide between rural and urban communities. I think it's a positive thing for the city of Wilmington to be leading the way and helping to bridge that rural-urban divide throughout Eastern North Carolina. I think it's great for us to be a resource for our rural partners and vice versa. It builds on Wilmington's legislative influence and relationships. It forces the General Assembly and Congress to be responsive to City of Wilmington and regional priorities by having such a large alliance. When you have over 70 communities that are signed up as members of the group, you can't ignore us. And then lastly, it places us ahead of the game for future natural disaster response and recovery needs. When the next one comes, and unfortunately we know it will, it places us in a position to have open lines of communication and a certain amount of influence, in my opinion, over decision makers at both the state and federal level to where we can immediately communicate with them and they know that we're representing a much larger group than just the city of Wilmington. And next slide, that's all I have. And I appreciate the time. I don't know if there's any questions that anyone has, and I appreciate y'all's support behind this.
Are there any questions for Tony?
Just one quick one. Do we need to do anything to write a letter or anything for Bill 500, or has that already been done?
We have worked directly with the bill sponsor. Mayor Sappho and some other elected officials helped craft that bill actually and been in one-on-one conversations with them. It would be a healthy thing, and I would very much appreciate any formal action that council would be willing to take in that regard. Yes.
Okay.
But we have been active on it, sir.
Anybody else? I just want to say thank you to Tony. Tony's been a tremendous help and in coordinating a lot of the meetings that we've had, and we've had some tremendous success. But I think the thing that, and Tony points to it immediately, is that the rural-urban divide, where the rural communities and the urban areas can come together to work on some significant legislation that is affecting all of our communities, shows the General Assembly that we're united. And this is an important issue, especially for Eastern North Carolina that has suffered the brunt of these storms over many years. And when you start not only hurricanes, we're starting to see now with tropical storms or even just large deluge of water that falls on us from time to time, that we're having problems all over Eastern North Carolina. So by bringing this coalition together, it surprised all of us. I mean, we knew that we would have some support, but we didn't realize the support that we would get throughout the entire eastern part of the state. So it's a great organization, and appreciate all your help in helping us put it together and work together as a team.
I'd like to suggest that we do something formal. If it's a resolution or whatever we need to do.
Let's do a resolution.
Yeah, I'd like to initiate that we do a resolution. Yeah, making calls, absolutely.
Over at COG yesterday, this came up and we've got everybody in the COG region calling their representatives. But the resolution is certainly
Yeah.
worthy as well.
And it's a significant amount of money at $200 million that we're talking about here. So for Eastern North Carolina, that's huge. So thank you, Tony. Appreciate it.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. It brings us to our next item of business, which is our consent agenda, items 1 through 8. Are there any items that any council member would like to hear separately? If not, what are the wishes of council?
C4 for me, please.
C3 and C4. Anybody else? Okay. We have a motion to accept the consent agenda excluding items C3 and C4.
So moved.
We have a motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes, second by Councilmember Barnett. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. At this time, I'd like to recognize Councilmember Kevin Spears. Mr. Spears.
And my question for C3 as it relates to the New Hanover County Board of Education and the assignment of 4 police officers. I think we've been experiencing, I'm not against this, but I'm asking in what capacity will they serve as it states safety? In what manner of safety? Not, because I think there's a big misconception about the role that officers play in a school, SROs, that they're not there for discipline reasons. They're there for safety. So I just want to hear, I just want to hear from my good friend, Captain Hargrove.
Captain Hargrove.
Hello, sir.
How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. The role our resource officers play in the school is some safety reason and also to interact with our students, serve as mentors also.
Oh, I absolutely get that. And I'm not trying to trip you up or anything, but I think it's good for the community to understand that, because across the nation, we've seen some interaction between law enforcement, and I'm not dogging law enforcement, please don't mistake that, but some instances where we've seen some negative interaction between students, children, and officers. So, I just want to be able to put it out there for the community, for our community to understand that, this is a safety first issue and not a disciplinary thing. I think there's been a thing where there's an issue with a child or a student and an SRO goes down instead of, a principal or teacher or whatever handling the situation. So I just wanted to provide some clarity for the community. That's all.
Yeah, we are there for safety reasons, but we also want our officers and the students to engage in non-confrontational manners. We don't want our officers to, only time they get to interact with our students is when it's something's going wrong. We want them to be able to interact with them in a non-confrontational setting. That way they develop relationships at that point.
Let's follow up with that question though. Just curious, what kind of special training do these officers take, or do they have a special training?
Yeah, they're required to go through SRO, the SRO training. I think it's put on by the New Hanover County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you.
This program has been a huge success.
Mhm.
It's been ongoing now for a number of, 10 years. Been quite a while. There was some heartburn at one time about the fact that should be a county function, but I remember Chief Evangelist thought it was very important to get our officers in there to, like Captain said, interact with these, especially the younger children, let them see an officer in an environment other than confrontation.
Police, I understand.
And a lot of our citizens really expect us as council to have some type of say for a lot of these schools that are within our city limits. And they're surprised when we say that we have no authority there. So it is good to have some a presence in these schools.
Well, and I think it's also important for citizens that may not be aware of this, but officers I'm old enough, when I was going to school, we didn't have officers in the school. But Columbine changed all that in 96, 97, when those 2 young students killed 15, 16 of their classmates. So that changed all that. And then we had the incident in Connecticut where those 32-some kids or 20-some kids were killed in an elementary school. And there was a tremendous public outcry from the citizens that asked us, elected leaders, along with the county commissioners, to make sure that the elementary schools were also protected. I know that we're not in the elementary schools, Captain Hargrove, but I know that we're in the high schools.
Yes.
But I do believe that, as Captain Hargrove mentioned, I think the interaction with the students and our police officers is important to build that relationship, because we don't want you know, sometimes the only time they get to see a police officer, unfortunately, is in a bad situation. But getting to know these men and women that work those schools, I think is very important. I don't believe we've had any significant incidents in any of the high schools, at least since I've been here. I'm sure there's been incidents that y'all have had to take care of, but I know that you folks are very well trained. I know it's a very, very, you know, very specific type of training to be with young people to make certain that we don't have an incident, as Kevin alluded to, where you have somebody gets thrown to the ground and it looks like they're, you know, they're being brutalized. So, you know, we appreciate all of the hard work you folks do, and are sensitive to the parents that also want to make sure that the students are not only protected, but they're not, their civil rights aren't violated either. So I know it's delicate, but I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
I make a motion to
Okay.
approve C3.
Mr. Spears has made the motion to approve C3. Is there a second to that motion? Second by Councilman Ravenbark. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Now we'll go to item C4, which is a resolution authorizing the interlocal agreement with the Housing Authority in the city of Wilmington to assign 3 police officers to the authority. Mr. Spears?
Now, my question for C4 is, again, I'm in support of it, but was there not a need to increase the amount of officers that we would put on Housing Authority property with the uptick in violence that we've been experiencing?
We are also in partnership with the County Sheriff's Office who provide deputies to assist us in Housing Authority. So, and they are given to us with no charge.
Well, I would hope it would be no charge. I mean, we are in the county.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not like they're doing us a favor. That's their job. But again, like, you know, and the uptick, you know, we could use a few more helping hands from both sides, honestly. Do you agree or disagree? And I don't want to put you on the spot, but, you know, it's the perspective that I see. And I know we're in the, you know, defund the police era or whatever, but there is a part of the population who couldn't even fathom defunding the police. No matter how profound the trend is.
Correct. And just like the schools, we have our housing task force put together so they can develop those relationships also. Get out and do community engagement. So where we engage the community, just like we engage the school, get around and talk to the citizens in our housing areas in non-confrontational settings. So when it's confrontational, if anything that troubling that happens on Housing Authority property, they have a relationship developed that it'll ease the pressure of people going to jail or anything else.
That's all I have.
Okay.
I make a motion to approve
We have a
C4.
motion to approve by Councilmember Spears for C4.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Barnett. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. That brings us to our next item of business, which is our public information. We have
Thank you, Captain.
2 speakers that have
Deputy.
signed up to speak this evening. First speaker is Ms. Francisca Waddell, who will be speaking to us about Wilmington Affordable Housing Crisis. Ms. Waddell? Is she here?
She did not show up, sir.
Okay. Is Ms. Roberta Penn here?
No, sir.
Okay, so both public information. Okay. So we'll go on to our next item of business, which is our public hearings. Item PH1 is an ordinance amending the minimum housing codes, building standards, and non-residential building codes, Chapter 16, Article 5, Article 6, and Article 7 for compliance with the North Carolina General Statute 160D. At this time, I'd like to recognize Interim City Manager, Mr. Tony Caudle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. Sean Evans, our Assistant City Attorney, will present this item.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. Brian Renner is here tonight to back me up if I have trouble answering any of your questions. So I appreciate him being here. You'll recall from the first June meeting that there were several items brought before council involving North Carolina statute 160D and its subparts. The city's been mandated to change certain things in our code by a July 1 deadline. We've made an effort to try to get as much of that before you as we could in one setting, but regretfully it got broken up into two different meetings. And so you're catching up on the last two parts of it tonight. This would be the first part. This we couldn't bring to you last time due to the need to have a public hearing, and the notices need to be sent out. So in order to comply with that, it was set on today's agenda. That being said, there were a couple of questions that were presented yesterday at agenda brief, and I want to answer those in just a minute. But just in brief summary, the purpose of the changes to our Chapter 16, as I indicated already, are to update legal references to 160D, changing those from references from 160A as they currently exist. To change the definition of a dwelling to specifically exclude recreational vehicles if used solely for seasonal vacation purpose. And while Melissa and Brian were making the changes to that, they went ahead and did a yeoman's job of bringing this and making it a more modern provision of our code. It's been written now to be more gender neutral. So you'll notice some of those changes as well. There's a couple of exhibits that were in your package. The first is the text as it will appear with the changes incorporated in it. The second is basically a red line version that points out the changes that were made. And the third attachment gives a summary of those changes, just a short and simple summary of what was changing and where it changed. If you'll allow me just a couple of minutes, and I'll be as brief as I can, but Councilmember O'Grady asked a couple of good questions at agenda briefing yesterday. I want to briefly respond to those. He asked if there was any change regarding the definition of an inhabitable home. I've spoken with Melissa Huffman, looked at our current ordinance, prior 160A and current 160D, and can confirm that no aspect of that definition has changed. And then is that a fair summary? Thank you. And I can try to do my best to answer follow-up questions on that if I can. And Councilmember Grady also asked about a provision I wasn't aware of, so I went and looked it up. But there's a provision in Chapter 16, Article 5, specifically Section 16-230. It appears, if you want to look at it on page 5 of your handout. But there's a kind of interesting portion of that where our code goes through 3 different ways that a complaint process can be started. It can be started by a public official, such as, policeman, firefighter, EMS personnel. The second one was the one the question was directed at. An action can also be initiated basically by a complaint being filed by at least 5 residents of the city, indicating that a violation has taken place. And then the final way is through action directly by city staff. But I wasn't aware of that provision either, so I went back and took a look at it, and it is consistent with what we have in our code now. It's also codified in state law previously in 160A 443, and it did carry forward in 160D in section 12032. So it's not new. I wasn't familiar with it, so I just wanted to pass that along to you. But if anyone has any specific questions, I may have to defer to Brian if they're too specific, but be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Any questions of staff, Mr. Robinson?
Just one, so if 5 people do what's called for in Section A, the house still is subject to being inspected to make sure that it's not just something that's an unpopular neighbor.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify that. So the petition by 5 residents of the city, that really just kind of forces a hearing in the process that we use it. So if we get a petition in that says 5 people are claiming this building's unfit for human habitation, we'll go look at it just like we do every complaint that we get.
Thank
And then that just moves us straight into the hearing process. Typically, when we get a complaint, we go look at it, we assess it, and then we work with that property owner or landlord or even tenant to get the property in compliance before we even start the hearing process.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. This time we open up the public hearing and ask if anybody in the public wishes to speak on item PH1. Okay, we see none. Are there any further comments? Madam Clerk, have you received any comments? Are there any additional questions from council? Hearing none, what are the wishes? I'm going to close the public hearing and ask for the wishes of council.
On promotion that we accept the ordinance.
Okay. We have a
Second.
motion by Councilmember Barnett, second by Councilmember O'Grady. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first reading. Is there a motion to waive second reading? Motion made by Councilmember Rivenbark, second by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first as well as second reading. That brings us to our next item of business, which is item PH2, which is an ordinance for the closure of a partially improved right-of-way portion of Old Highway Airlie Road, approximately 207 feet in length along Airlie Road. And this was continued from our May 18th, 2021 meeting. And this time I'd like to recognize the interim city manager, Mr. Tony Cottle. Mr. Cottle.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I believe City Attorney John Joy has a request of council for a continuance on this item.
Very good.
That is correct. If it could be continued to July 20th. This is a chain of title research and it's taken a little bit of time. We're working with the applicants out there, the folks who live there, and we need to know where this property is going to go once it's abandoned, if that's the will of council.
Okay. Do we have a motion to continue this item to July 20th, 2021? We have a motion made by Councilmember Rivenbark, second by Councilmember O'Grady. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. That brings us to our next item of business, which is our ordinances. These are all on second reading. Item 01A is an ordinance making appropriation to the general fund for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2021. Item 01B is an ordinance making appropriations to the grant projects, financial plans, enterprise funds, debit service funds, and special tax district for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2021. Item 01C is an ordinance making appropriation to the capital projects fund for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2021. And item 01D is an ordinance amending various chapters of the City of Wilmington fee schedule for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2021. At this time, I'd like to recognize our interim city manager, Mr. Tony Cottle. Mr. Cottle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As second reading on all of these, as well as these have been discussed ad nauseum for the last 6 months, we do not have a presentation for you this evening. I will call to your attention that there have been 2 items that have been added to the budget since the May 3rd, 4th presentation of the manager's recommended budget. Those 2 things included a ballistics testing equipment for the police department and $8,000 for the community enrichment project. So those have been added and are reflected in your second reading items.
Okay, very good. We'll take these individually. Correct, Attorney Joy?
Mr. Mayor, you can consolidate them to pass all at one time as long as there's no objection from council. It can be done together. If any member of council wants them individually, because they might vote against one as opposed to the other, then you would have to do them individually.
What does the council say? Wait, could you turn on your microphone, Mr. Rivenbark? Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, that's okay.
I move approval of ordinances 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D.
Okay, very good.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion made by Councilman Rivenbark, second by Councilman Barnett. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. That brings us to our next item of business, which is item 02A, which is an ordinance approving amendments to the rules of procedure for the Board of Adjustment mandated by the changes to North Carolina General Statute 160D. And then I will also say that these all kind of company items. Item O2B is the ordinance approving amendments to the rules of procedure for the Historic Preservation Commission mandated by the changes to North Carolina General Statute 160D. Item O2C is an ordinance approving amendments to the rules of procedure for the Planning Commission mandated by the changes to North Carolina General Statute 160D. And then item O2D is an ordinance approving amendments to the rules of procedure for the Subdivision Review Board mandated by the changes to the North Carolina General Statute 160D. At this time, I'd like to recognize Interim City Manager, Mr. Tony Carter. Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Continuing the Sean Evans show for the evening, he'll be handling all four of these items for you.
Excuse me, Mr. Joy, and we can do the same with these. We can bundle all these, all four together, or do we have to take a separate vote on each and every one of them?
You can bundle these all together. They are ordinances, so you will have to, it'd have to be a first reading and then a waive. And I certainly would check with council to see if anyone would want them individually first.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Good evening again. Thanks for hearing from me again on these items. Each of these rule changes was taken to their respective board for them to vote on them before bringing them before City Council. So that step has been completed. 160D mandated that a few things be put into place for all boards and commissions, including City Council. The most noteworthy of them are slight changes in the conflict of interest standards, a requirement that everybody take an oath before you consider any cases. Those are the two big ones. And one of the little bit more obscure ones is just to make sure that everybody takes minutes of their board proceedings. And I think we had one board that was taking minutes, but we didn't have it in the rules, so we made sure we put that in. The other boards already had that in there, so that wasn't a change across the board. Let me begin by saying that what's in here is a little duplicative. At your last meeting on 6/1, City Council passed a code amendment to 8-29, which inserted into our city code all of the conflict of interest standards that are mandated by Chapter 160D-109. So those are largely repeated in what you see before you here tonight. And in addition to that, the oath standards have been added. I'll note that Council Member O'Grady let me know there was a slight language inconsistency regarding O2D, regarding the Subdivision Review Board. And I'll admit that was the one that I did first, and I did not quote the statute verbatim. And I did speak with Councilmember O'Grady and let him know that we'd had passed at the last meeting the identical language that applies to all boards in Chapter 8, Section 29. But if there are any specific questions about those changes that have been made, similar to what you heard a few minutes ago, in addition to those, we did make an effort as we went through these to try to make these more gender neutral. Some of them hadn't been amended in a number of years, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, Ms. Rosenbaum?
Just one, when we go back to the conflict of interest, I know over at the MPO, the first thing on our agenda every month is our conflict of interest statement. And we have to sign that we have to do this ethics course, and it's rather detailed, scary, because it's got all kinds of warnings about you can go to prison for the rest of your life if you don't disclose everything or whatever. On this, I've been told, and I've covered this ground before, but I want to be crystal clear on this. If someone who works for the company that I work for comes before this board, this council, with a rezoning or a permit or anything, in years gone by, it's been said that if I didn't have a financial interest in that, in other words, if I weren't one of the brokers involved as a listing or a selling or whatever agent on that particular transaction, I could vote. I was told that. Am I to understand now that if somebody who works for my company comes before for whatever reason, I am not allowed to vote? Is that the change?
I'll take that one.
Okay.
Council member, that's an excellent question. I am going to reserve the right to deal on each one on a case-by-case basis, but I'm going to give you a general rule. This does add a business or associational relationship conflict, and that says that you wouldn't vote in that zoning context. So it does change how we will deal with it, generally speaking. Prior to this change, North Carolina has given council members a duty to vote in any case that you don't have a direct financial interest in. And the rules that define that defined a fairly narrow financial interest. This broadens that scope, but let me give you an example of why I need to reserve the right to look at it case by case. If you're dealing with, let's say, a business partner, someone that hired you or you hired and you're vested with that business relationship, then absolutely you wouldn't be able to vote. But let's say that you work in a larger company and you have multiple employees, maybe you own a McDonald's chain. Just because there's someone who empties the trash at this McDonald's that you've never met before, that would not forestall you from voting. So I'd have to look at it case by case, but generally, if it's some of the folks you work directly with at your business, then you would be under a conflict and not able to vote.
I'm still not 100% clear. Your examples were not good.
I'm sorry.
There are 12 brokers in my office, and sometimes we co-broke things together, we co-sell things together, but if agent A is doing a deal with somebody that I've never even been involved in, and they have to come before this council, and I have no connection other than the fact that we both work at the same company, that qualifies me not to be able to vote.
I would not think that'd be a conflict of interest if effectively all you do is you each have an office in the same building and you don't work together.
Because we're all private contractors.
Indeed,
Okay.
indeed. That would not foreclose you from voting. Let's say that it's a broker that you have co-brokered many deals with and you maybe gave a little advice, that'd be too close.
I
Couldn't do it
understand.
then.
I just wanted to be clear on that because a no vote is a yes vote. If you know, I mean,
Yes, I understand.
okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. So, John, we can take all four of these with one vote with first and second reading?
If there's no objection by council, you certainly could.
All right, okay.
I offer a motion that we accept all four.
Can you go ahead and itemize them, please, for the record, Mr. Barnett?
O2A, O2B, O2C, and O2D.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to accept all four of those items. Is there a second to that? Second by Councilmember O'Grady. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first reading. Is there a motion to waive second reading? Motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes, second by Councilmember Ravenbark. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first as well as second reading. That brings us to our next item of business, which is item 03, which is an ordinance making a supplemental appropriation in the amount of $144,000 to the golf course fund for a gold tee renovation at Wilmington Municipal Golf Course. And at this time, I'd like to recognize interim city manager, Mr. Tony Carter. Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Matt Smith, our golf course superintendent, will overview this item for us.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. Here tonight to present to you a consideration for a supplemental ordinance of $144,000 for a gold tee / senior tee renovation at the Wilmington Municipal Golf Course. The reason why we need this renovation is these gold tees currently are only 700 square feet in size. And with the 60,000 rounds of golf we're playing on them, about 40% of those are our senior players. So you can imagine it's just getting trampled. We've resodded these tees every year for the past 3 or 4 years to no avail. So I think the best thing to do in this situation is enlarge these tees up to 2,500 square feet, which is kind of similar to what our white and blue tees are. Also, some of these gold tees are just simply mowed out areas and flat spots. It's not an actual tee per se. There's no elevation to it. So we're just looking to make this improvement for the enjoyment of our golfers and increase profitability and keep us moving in the right direction. With that, if there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Any questions of our staff?
I'd just like to say that I bet $100 that if we gave him 6 weeks, he could have grass growing in the parking lot. It has never looked better than it does. Proud of it.
I wanted to congratulate him on the latest, what you named one of the best municipal
top-
golf
yeah.
courses in the country.
Top 30 by Golf Magazine.
Yeah.
21 in the country, Wilmington Municipal. So
Yeah.
that's some good company. Actually, where they're playing the U.S. Open this weekend is a municipal golf course that is
Yeah.
on that list. So we're with some big company there. We really got
I
a
was-
special place that I can see a vision for the future to be even better.
Thank you.
The only problem is it's going to bring us more customers and you can't put many more rounds on it.
60,000, that's incredible. Thank you very much. Great work out there.
Yeah, you're welcome.
What are the wishes of council in respect to the ordinance?
So,
We have a
second,
motion by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes to accept, seconded by Councilmember Ravenberg. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes unanimously on first reading. Is there a motion to waive second reading?
So moved.
Motion made by Councilmember Barnett, seconded by Councilmember Spears. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first as well as second reading. That brings us to our next item of business, which is item 04, which is an ordinance appropriating the American Rescue Plan Act funds allocated from the U.S. Treasury to the city of Wilmington in the amount of $25,929,952. And at this time, I'd like to recognize our interim city manager, Mr. Tony Cottle. Mr. Cottle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Interim Deputy City Manager Jennifer Moretti will overview this item for us.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. This item before you tonight is an ordinance to accept and appropriate the American Rescue Plan Act funding for the city of Wilmington that has been allocated from the U.S. Treasury in the amount of $25,929,952. These funds provide a substantial infusion of resources to help turn the tide on the pandemic, address the economic fallout, and lay the foundation for a strong and equitable recovery. The funding will be provided in two separate equal payments. The first payment of $12,964,976 was dispersed to the city in May and received in our bank on June 1. The second payment will be dispersed 12 months later in May of 2022. As presented to council previously, the city established a working committee of 9 executive staff members that brought a funding plan recommendation to council that meets the allowable uses established by the act to respond to the public health emergency and its negative economic impacts. Staff will continue to update council on these recommendations as we move forward, establishing the format of how these funds will be delivered to provide assistance within the community. As this funding is restricted on the use, the appropriation is to the Special Revenue Fund that will allow for specific spending and reporting as required by the U.S. Treasury. A transfer to the Convention Center Fund and the Parking Fund is included with this appropriation. These amounts are for planning purposes at this time and will only be transferred to cover expenses that will allow the city to make up for the use of the fund balance in these funds for fiscal years 2021 through 2024. As we discussed in previous meetings, when we did our projections for fiscal year 2021, we are estimating that we will have to pull from the fund balance of the Convention Center Fund possibly up to $3.6 million. When the American Rescue Plan funding was first allocated, there was a revenue recovery part of this. As more guidance came out, we found that we can't just replace what we pulled from fund balance, but instead we can calculate the revenue that we lost citywide. And with that calculation, the amount of funding that we lost citywide, we can use those funds to cover expenses from March 3rd, 2021 going forward. So that is our plan to help us recover in the convention center fund and possibly the parking fund if we need to pull from our fund balance, is to use those funds calculated from the revenue loss citywide to cover expenses from March 3rd forward to help us reduce the amount of fund balance that we have to pull in 2021, and then as well continue into 2022 and further until we see that those revenues sustain in the convention center fund. We've lost room occupancy tax revenue as well as event revenue from the convention center having to be closed down, in addition to the parking fund. All those revenues helped us financially support the convention center. So that's what the $7.3 million is, including $2 million for the plan that Eris Dunstan explained to council to upgrade the convention center to allow more room for events and take advantage of the space that's not used so we can expand the events, bring larger events here and use that space. So that is what the transfer, that is part of this appropriation. And again, it's for planning purposes at this time and will be transferred over as we cover expenses going forward. These funds must be, yes, sir.
So the bottom line there is that these are targets we have, but these numbers may change as we get more precise.
Exactly. As we move forward and see the continuing impacts of the pandemic, and also as we continue to receive further guidance from the Treasury on clarification and allowable use of these funds, this plan will change and we'll bring that back to council periodically with updates. Again, the funds must be obligated by December 31st, 2024, and all projects completed by December 2026. As I just mentioned, the U.S. Treasury is currently taking comments on the interim guidance through July 16, 2021, and further guidance and clarification on allowable uses will continue to be released following the comment period. Staff recommends the approval of the ordinance accepting and appropriating these funds to the Special Revenue Fund, and I will answer any questions you have on the item.
Jennifer, the two funds that were most hit during this pandemic was the convention center and the parking fund.
Yes, sir.
And the combined total for the convention center was 3.2 million, you had indicated?
For the current fiscal year, estimated about 3.6 million.
3.6, and then the parking fund?
About 300,000. As we see the restrictions lift, we are seeing more revenue come in. So that was an estimate we did back in April. So hopefully that will reduce down.
Okay, and those were, and that's the only funds that you're asking to be replenished in respect to those two items?
Yes, sir. Our general fund, because of the sales tax revenue that came in higher than projected, it is just these two funds that we are looking like we will have to pull from fund balance to cover expenses.
The other thing that I just wanted to ask you, I know during this pandemic, I know that it seems like the ABC Commission did very well. Do you remember what the numbers were there in respect to the money that we received from the ABC Commission?
I do not have that, but I can get that information.
Okay, I appreciate it.
It'll all be a bunch.
I'm sure.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
A lot
sir.
of drinking.
So Jennifer, is the obligation date, is that the target date when we have to have firm numbers?
That is when we have to have all encumbrances, all contracts in place, and they are allowing 2 additional years to complete any project. So if we start the upfit of the convention center and we have those contracts in place by 2024, they give us till 2026 to complete it and pay everything out.
So by signing the contracts, we're obligated, so that's
Exactly.
the money will be obligated by that
Yes,
point.
sir.
So that's the next target date that we have to be looking at here.
Correct.
Yes, sir, Mr.
You
Burke.
you mentioned July 16th, they're going to be taking questions or what?
Yes, the U.S. Treasury issued interim guidance on how to spend these funds, what's eligible, what's allowable. And they're taking comments on that interim guidance through July 16, because there's some items in there that we need clarification on. And there's some question, like I mentioned at first, we were told that we could replenish any lost revenue that we had to pull from fund balance when the interim guidance came out. That was not clear. And then they came out and said, well, no, you have to use this calculation. So that is still one of the questions that are out there, is because several organizations had to pull down significantly from their fund balance just to get through the pandemic. And so they are requesting some leniency on that and allow them to replenish the fund balance instead of just covering expenses going forward. So there's a lot of questions still out there, clarification and comments on additional uses and allowable eligibility for the funds.
Are there any questions that we have that we need to get to them? Pretty clear.
I don't think that we have any that, is going to prevent us from moving forward, working on our plan. I am hesitant to wait until that guidance comes out to see if anything changes. While we don't think it'll be anything more restrictive than what we have received, with the CARES Act, we experienced changes within, continuing 6 months after we received the funding, and some of that did change what we were originally told. So we just want to make sure we are in compliance with the use of these funds.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions? Okay, thank you, Jennifer. What are the wishes of council in respect to item 04?
Offer motion that we accept item 04.
Okay, we have a motion made by Councilman Barnett, second by Councilmember O'Grady. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first reading. Is there a motion to waive second reading? Motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes.
Second.
Second by Councilmember O'Grady. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first as well as second reading. That brings us to item 05, which is an ordinance adjusting the appropriation of various funds to align with the actual funding received in debit service fund, home, and CARES Act projects. At this time, I'd like to recognize interim city manager, Mr. Tony Cottle. Mr. Cottle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Moretti will oversee this item as well.
Mr. Mayor and council members, this ordinance before you is an item that allows staff to make corrections and adjustments to several funds needing alignment with actual revenues awarded and received by the city. This is more of a cleanup of our accounts throughout the year. These funds include the debt service fund to correct an ordinance that was brought to council in May for the debt issuance, allowing a transfer of $250,000 to the sports complex project to cover the issuance costs. The next item is to appropriate interest that was received on the CARES Act funding of $860 to allow us to complete the expenditures on these funds and complete the final reporting. The final item is to align the home funds awarded with the city's grant year appropriations in the net amount of $45,648. These grant years are 2014, 2016, and 2017. Staff has worked with HUD representatives to reconcile the city grant years with HUD's IDIS financial system. Grant years 2016 and 2017 have an adjustment needed that balances between the 2 years and net to zero. Grant year 2014 is an adjustment reducing the home award in 2014 by $90,162 and increasing the revolving funding revenue by $44,514, resulting in a net adjustment of $45,648. Staff recommends the approval of this ordinance to allow for these corrections and adjustments needed for these funds, and I will answer any questions you have.
Any questions, Ms. Moretti? Okay. What are the wishes of council in respect to the item?
Offer motion and we move the item.
We have a motion made by Councilmember Barnett,
Second.
second by Councilmember O'Grady. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first reading. Is there a motion to waive second reading? Motion made by Councilman Rivenbark, second by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first as well as second reading. That brings us to item 06. I will announce that the following ordinance was continued at the agenda briefing for our next council meeting on July the 20th, which is the ordinance modifying an existing CBCD community business conditional district located at 3819 Carolina Beach Road to allow for a 4,160 square foot vehicle wash. So that will be continued until the July 20th meeting. That brings us to our next item of business, which is item R1, which is a resolution directing the interim city manager to process an amendment to the official zoning map of the city of Wilmington for property located at 3821 Carolina Beach Road. This was sponsored by Councilmember Neil Anderson. I would ask that this item be also continued to our July 20th meeting since Mr. Anderson is not here at this time. And I know that this was probably in relations to the article or this item 06. So Can I have a motion to continue this particular item?
So moved.
Motion made by Councilman Ravenbark, second by
Second.
Councilmember Spears. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This will be heard on July the 20th. This brings us to our next item of business, which is item R2, which is a resolution supporting the completion of a feasibility study to evaluate potential solutions for improved bicycle and pedestrian crossing of College Road in the vicinity of the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. This is sponsored by Councilmember Ravenbark. So at this time, I'd like to recognize Councilmember Charlie Ravenbark. Mr. Ravenbark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would it be appropriate for me just to read the resolution? Okay.
Certainly.
Well, just background, the DOT has agreed to do a feasibility study to do just that, to see if, what makes sense there at College Road and in the vicinity of Randall Parkway. And this resolution is merely just to give our boys. Resolution supporting the completion of a feasibility study to evaluate potential solutions for improved bicycle and pedestrian crossing of College Road in the vicinity of the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Whereas South College Road is a major north-south corridor in New Hanover County and is designated as a principal arterial on the Wilmington Urban Area Metropolitan Planning Organization's adopted functional classification maps. And whereas a traffic count collected by the WMPO in February of 2021 on College Road south of Randall Parkway was 80,250 vehicles per day. And whereas the University of North Carolina, Wilmington's most recent master plan was completed in 2017 and indicated that the faculty, staff, and student populations are expected to increase significantly by 2021. And based on this master plan, the university projected a head count of 16,133 on-campus students enrolled for the fall of 2021. And whereas a significant amount of off-campus student housing is being constructed on the west side of College Road, which requires students to cross College Road in order to get to and from the university. And whereas the Gary Shell Cross City Trail, which is the spine of the city's trail network, beginning at Wade Park and terminating at the Heidi Trash Drawbridge, is used for both recreation and transportation by citizens and visitors in the community. And whereas the Gary Shell Cross City Trail crosses College Road at Randall Parkway and traverses UNCW's property, and whereas the completion of a feasibility study to evaluate a pedestrian bridge, tunnel, or other potential alternative crossing solutions could lead to enhanced bicycle and pedestrian safety along the busy College Road corridor. Therefore, be it resolved that the Wilmington City Council hereby supports and directs the completion of a feasibility study to evaluate potential solutions to provide an improved bicycle and pedestrian crossing of College Road in the vicinity of UNCW. If this were approved tonight and they completed their feasibility study and everything was thumbs up, it might be 10 years because it's got to get on the state transportation improvement plan and be funded. But this is way further than we've ever got before. It's kind of like the rail thing. This is an important step, and I really appreciate the DOT getting behind this. Chancellor Sartelli and all of his group out there, it couldn't be done without them. So with that, I would move the resolution.
Can we have a motion to approve? Second by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes. Discussion. I'd just also like to just say thank you to Councilman Ravenbark for championing this. And I know that this is a very important item that we've been talking about for quite some time. And I know they've had a couple of looks at this in years past, but with that university growing and the number of cars on South College Road and the number of students that have now located or on the other side of on the west side of College Road, this is very important to our community for safety, or somebody's really going to get hurt out there on that highway crossing back and forth over College Road. So thank you for championing that, Charlie. Really do. So with that, all in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The item passes unanimously. That brings us to the next item, which is item R3, which is resolution authorizing the interim city manager to enter into a lease agreement for office space with Harrelson Building LLC. And at this time, I'd like to recognize our interim city manager, Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As stated in the item title, this is the lease of space in the Harrelson Building on the second floor, almost 7,100 square feet, which will accommodate expanding IT needs as well as expansion in the PIO office. In addition to the 7,000 or 7,100 square feet on the second floor, we have renegotiated the lease on the 5th floor for the same amount of money. It's $24.45 per square foot annually, and that is a savings on the 5th floor of almost $1 per square foot. So what we would ask tonight is to pass the resolution authorizing me to enter into agreements that would allow us to not only lease the 7,100 square feet on the 2nd floor, but also the almost 10,000 square feet on the 5th floor. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions, Mr. Cottle? Okay.
Yeah, just one quick question. The 5th floor request is really not in this, what we got now, is it?
It is a part of the resolution, yes, sir, for me to be able to negotiate both leases.
Okay. I guess I don't see it in my writing, but, okay. I mean, I'm not against it, I just didn't see, I just saw the 7,000 square feet. I didn't see the other one. Oh, there it is, I'm sorry. Leases on the 5th floor of the
Yes,
same
sir.
building. Okay, I just got to read more, thanks. It's fundamental. I apologize, sir. All right, I am off a motion.
Okay.
And we accept that.
Councilman Barnett has made the motion to
Second.
approve. Second by Councilmember O'Grady. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. That brings us to item R4, which is a resolution rejecting all bids for the City Hall, Thalian Hall HVAC improvements project as non-responsive and authorizing the project to be re-advertised for bid. At this time, I'd like to recognize our interim city manager, Mr. Caudle. Mr. Caudle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dave Mays, our Public Services Director, will overview this item for us.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The city received 3 bids for the City Hall HVAC project on April 6th. The instructions to bidders included a requirement that they provide references for local work within our historic district. Unfortunately, all 3 bids received failed to meet this requirement and did not provide adequate references. This resolution will support the rejection of all bids and allow us as non-responsive and allow us to proceed with rebidding. I think it's safe to say as well that staff will work with the attorney's office to make sure that our reference requirements for the next bid will be better defined. Hopefully we'll receive bids that would be considered responsive. Be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Mr.
I
Rumble.
just have one. I certainly understand the criteria. I mean, I can appreciate that. But in this day and time that we're in, I think that's a little bit overreach requiring that they have that kind of, I mean, HVAC work is HVAC work. If you've got to have somebody to make it pretty, hire somebody else to do that. That place needs HVAC work now. And rejecting them because they hadn't done 5 projects or whatever I just read in the historic district, I just think that's a little bit overreach. And I don't know that in this market with everybody as busy as they are, I don't know that you're ever going to get anybody.
If I may, Mr. Rivenbark, the reason for the requirement was not because of the specific work related to HVAC, but it was because of the architectural work that is required as a part of the project.
That's what I meant. I mean, if you got to I'd get somebody to do the HVAC work and hire a craftsman to do whatever else needs to be done to satisfy the historic people. I'm confused here. HVAC people don't do that. They do HVAC.
Yes, sir. And as a requirement or a function of the design, one of the units will be placed on the rear roof of Thalian Hall. And we had to get HPC approval for the dormer that will actually be built over that where the ductwork connects into the roof of City Hall. So there is a fairly significant architectural change to the exterior of the building. So we actually had interest from contractors, larger building contractors that were willing to front the HVAC work as part of it.
Well, that's my point. I mean, I don't see this as a single contractor job. It looks to me like it's got two moving parts. One to do the HVAC upgrade and somebody to do the architectural doodah. Am I missing something here, Dave?
We can certainly take that into consideration. It simply requires us to bid two separate projects and manage two separate projects. But that's certainly something we can consider as we rebid it.
Well, let me ask you this, Dave, going to Charlie's question. Is it easier to bid in two separate, like Charlie said, somebody does the HVAC and then somebody does the architectural and does the carpentry? Is it easier to separate them, or is it which one is better for us?
Would be some pretty significant coordination issues that if we hired one contractor, that contractor would be responsible for managing that process. If you could not hire an HVAC contractor and then later come back and do the architectural work. The architectural work would need to come first. And the coordination of that work is really important in order to make sure it gets done. We're going to be building space in the upper mezzanine level of council chambers to house a new air handling unit. And in order for them to be able to get the machine up the stairs and into that space so that we can build the room around it, there's a coordination effort. So I don't think it's impossible to do it as two separate contracts, but it would put a lot of coordination efforts on the city. Whereas if we did it with one, that coordination would be solely housed with the contractor that we hired.
Well, let me ask the question this way. What would prevent you from hiring an HVAC contractor, a reputable HVAC contractor, and then instructing to him as a part of his contract that he has to go out and hire, a sub to come do I don't know of an HVAC contractor that does the kind of historical stuff you're talking about. I don't do that kind of stuff, but I've never heard that.
One of the bids that we got was from a traditional HVAC contractor. You're absolutely right. They did not provide any references. And in fact, in the documents for all three bids, they were listed as the sub on the other two bids.
Okay, so we got an AC guy. We now need a historic builder.
I guess my question is, with the historic building, is it a requirement that they have to work 10 years?
No, sir. This requirement came as a suggestion from the structural engineer that our designer had hired to produce the plans. This structural engineer has done lots of work for the city. This is not an unusual requirement for other things that he has done within the city, even for the city as a client. So it did not seem at the time, at least, to be a far stretch for what we were trying to achieve. And that is simply to get an experienced contractor sensitive to the work on the historic building.
I bet if you let the 8 or 10 or 15 people that work in our city hall do the approval, it'd get approved pretty quick. I was in Dawn's office the other day and it sounded like the damn place is getting ready to take off. That machine is it's not good. And you wait till a 95-degree day comes. I just think that there's a way to get this thing done without, it's like building a ship inside of a bottle. We just need to get the HVAC done. And I don't think the HPC, I don't know, it's a strong group down there.
Council member, part of a problem is the requirements we had were not as clear as they needed to be. And I think that led to why we've had to find folks non-responsive. And we're in a bit of a statutory conundrum where they didn't send in what they're supposed to under the bidding laws. You got to. So we're locked in to where we're at now, but we'll make sure that our requirements are clear and that there's nothing that really shouldn't be there. And I'll work with Dave and make sure that we're not asking for too much history, too much experience, too much references, but enough to be sure that we get the job done right.
Do we still do a pre-bid soiree where everybody gets together and they knew what's expected?
Yes, sir.
So when we rebid this, we tightened up the requirements. Will those 3 companies still have an opportunity to bid on this? They're not knocked out. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. They can participate.
Okay.
We'd expect them to.
All right. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, what was the council with respect to item 04? Item R4.
Offer motion that we accept the recommendation.
Okay, we have a motion made by Councilmember Barnett,
Second.
second by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passed unanimously. That brings us to our reports. Item RP1 is council's appointments committees for boards and commissions, and Mayor Pro Tem Margaret Haynes is the chairman. Chairperson of that committee will give the report. I'd like to recognize Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. While I chair that committee, Council Member Rivenbark and Council Member O'Grady also serve on that committee. And as always, we want to encourage people to please check out the website and apply for anything in which you have an interest and for which you feel you are qualified to serve. We have 4 recommendations this evening. The first one is the Civil Service Commission. The recommendation is to reappoint Dr. Carl Rust and to also reappoint Thomas Hackler from the Police Department. Dr. Rust is from the medical community. Both of those terms are to expire 4/15/2024. Secondly is the Wilmington New Hanover Joint Commission for Women. The recommendation is to appoint Debbie Todd. And the second recommendation there is to set a 3-year term limit for Kimberly Spader. And those terms would both expire on June 18th, 2024. The third recommendation is the Joint City New Hanover County Workforce Housing Advisory Committee. The recommendation is to appoint Eric Knight to fill a vacancy. He would be representing the North Carolina Realtors Association, and that term would expire August 20th, 2021. And the last recommendation is the Zoning Board of Adjustment. The recommendation is to appoint Jess Johnson for a term that would expire 4/1/2024. And with that, I'll make a motion asking the council to accept those recommendations.
Second.
We have a motion, second by Councilmember O'Grady. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. This concludes the regular agenda. Are there any items to be brought forward by our city attorney,
No, sir.
interim city manager?
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, just to remind you that on Thursday morning, you have a joint meeting with the Planning Commission here in this room. It begins at 8:30 a.m., scheduled to go to noon, work on the Land Development Code. Second item is to let you know that during your one meeting in July, this facility will be busy on the morning of the agenda briefing, and it is booked. So we have tentatively scheduled for you to meet in the Harrelson Building on the 5th floor for the agenda briefing. You'll be back here that night or the next night for the Tuesday night regularly scheduled meeting.
Very good.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Tony. Madam Clerk? Mr. Spears?
Yes, sir. As we move towards summer and anticipate the loosening of restrictions as it relates to COVID, I would suggest to all area businesses not to become so lax. When you go to grocery stores, you don't see the buggies being sanitized anymore. Trash in the buggies, hand sanitizer is empty. If we want to remain healthy and get back to the norm, I think the new norm, which we experience within this period of a year, should be ongoing. That's something that a standard we should keep for whatever else is to come. So I just would recommend that to local area businesses and also to citizens to maintain those health standards. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Ms. Rammar?
The other night I was watching I guess it was 11 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock news, I forget which, and there's a county pretty clear near here, not Pender, not Brunswick, and it showed their commission meeting, and they didn't know how much money they had. And it looked like a circular ambush. Everybody was pointing at everybody else, but they literally did not know how much money they had. They had to stop their budget process and go back at this late date. And I know it happened not many years ago, when the county misfigured the income and it put us in a heck of a bind, that was not our fault. And we managed, but my point in telling you this, it's wonderful to have the smart people that we have in our finance, our senior staff and the committee groups and what have you. I mean, we know where we are to the dime, but I felt right sorry for that crowd over there. I don't know how much money they got.
Mayor Pro Tem, Mr. O'Grady?
I was going to mention the golf courses at publicity, but we did that already. And, we're really lucky to have facilities like that here. It's not luck. We worked on them.
Thank you. Mr. Barnett?
Just two quick things. One, remind those persons who have not been vaccinated to get vaccinated. It's going to help not just you, but it's going to help everybody else that's around you. So we encourage people to do that. And then the second thing is this weekend is Father's Day weekend. So I want to say to all the dads, happy Father's Day, but also encourage dads to keep being there for your children, keep being there for your family, and just have a great weekend.
Thank you. I just want to say to the city staff, great work on this budget, $242.2 million budget, balanced, 30% fund balance, $8 million for resurfacing, about $29 million for a lot of CIP projects around our community. We've supported public safety, our fire and police departments. I think it was an outstanding job. I also want to thank the community members that we heard from, that came to us and said, we need more money for affordable housing. And this council supported that at $5.2 million, which is the largest affordable housing amount in this area. And that's a testament to the staff, to the people, to the community coming together. And this just didn't happen overnight, folks. I don't know, sometimes you got to give a little bit of a civic lesson, but this budget process has taken over 5 months. So it's not an easy process to go through, and we try to deal with a lot of pressures from a lot of different folks around the community that are in need of a lot of things. So I just want to say thank you. Good work, a good job to everybody, and that was a great job. Go ahead, Kevin.
Also, the fact that we invited a lot of people to participate in this budget process.
Absolutely.
And no one showed up.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. And one last thing, as an old timer here, to have Carlos Santana that's going to come play in Wilmington, North Carolina, I would have never believed it in 1,000 years that Carlos Santana would come play in Wilmington, North Carolina. But that park, and I know some of you have already seen it, is outstanding. It's going to be something that's this community is going to be very proud of, and I can't wait to see it come alive. So just on behalf of all the citizens, thank you. With that, thank you for taking an interest in your government. We stand adjourned.